Concept 31.3, let's take a look at a little bit of the background, the ancestor of fungi. The ancestor of fungi was an aquatic, single-celled, flagellated protist. And believe it or not, there is still one group of fungi that still have little tails or flagella, and we'll take a look at them as well. Fungi and animals are more closely related to each other than they are to plants or other eukaryotes. So again, it seems very unusual to look at a mushroom and think it's more related to an animal than it is a plant, but that is the case. Fungi and animals and their protist relatives form the Opisthocons clade. If you'll think back when we were talking about the eukarya, the domain of eukarya, we talked about the Opisthocons, and they contain fungi, animals, and the protists that we already discussed. So here is a basic little overview of all the Opisthocons. Coming from a unicellular flagellated ancestor, we have animals and their close protist relatives. That would include us and dogs and whales and everything like that. Then we have a type of creature called a nuclearids, and then we have the fungi, which we're going to look at the chytrids and then the other fungi. The chytrids would be the fungi that would be considered perhaps the most ancient, or the one that first branched off from the common ancestor, and then we'll subdivide the other fungi in just a moment. DNA evidence suggests that fungi are most closely related to a unicellular type of life called nuclearids. Animals are most closely related to unicellular conoflagellates. I believe that's how it's pronounced, conoflagellates. This suggests that multicellularity arose separately in both animals and fungi. So we would think that the animals and fungi separated from each other and then began their march toward multicellularity in two different instances. The oldest undisputed fossil of fungi are only about 460 million years old, but we do have evidence that supports that they have been around for longer than that, somewhere on the order of 600 million years. Here's a great picture from a microscope, obviously, of a fossil fungal hyphae and spores from the Ordovician period, which would have been about 460 million years ago. We do know that fungi were among the earliest creatures to colonize the land, and we do believe that they also formed these mutualistic relationships, these mycorrhizal relationships with the early land plants. And a lot of scientists feel that the expansion and success of these early land plants was due in part because of this mycorrhizal symbiotic relationship that they had with the fungi as well. And here is a good example of a scientific article that you could take a look at. Unfortunately, I think this one is behind a paywall, but you can probably find this article elsewhere as well. That kind of talks about the early fungi and land plants and how they probably evolved together in these mutualistic beneficial relationships. Next up, we'll take a brief look at the basic major groupings of fungi. And again, I won't expect us to know a huge amount of detail about each one of these groupings, but we will need to know just a little bit. On page 642 in your textbook, there's a great layout of pictures and information about the different types of fungi we're going to take a look at. We're going to look at chytrids, which are the ones that actually have the little flagellated bodies with the little tails. We're going to look at zygomycetes, glomerulomycetes, ascomycetes, and then basidiomycetes. Basidiomycetes are probably the ones you're going to be most familiar with. They are the ones that form the mushrooms that you've likely seen in your lawn or out in the woods, but we'll kind of mention the rest of these as well, and we'll try to hit the highlights and hit the high points and kind of point out examples of ones you've probably seen before. Now again, each one of these kind of have their own mode of reproduction, and I don't want you to get too bogged down in each of the unique modes of reproduction for each one of these types of fungi, but I do want you to kind of go back and recall in some of the earlier concepts of this chapter where we kind of discussed reproduction in general, how the fact that for the most part they reproduce using spores, that these are for the most part haploid spores, and that much of their life is spent in a haploid state. So we'll take a quick break and we'll come back and take a look just briefly at these categories of fungi.